Weeks passed, and the days began to grow warmer. The chill of winter was fading, and the desert flowers started to bloom across the hills. Maria's small world was the same. Early mornings, long shifts, evenings spent reading to Tommy. But something had changed inside her. It was quiet, gentle, and confusing. She thought about Luke more often than she wanted to admit. Sometimes she would catch herself glancing toward the road, hoping to see him riding by, and when she didn't, she felt a small ache, though she couldn't explain why. Luke had become part of their lives in ways that didn't need words. When her water pipe broke one morning, she came home from the diner to find it already fixed. When Tommy lost his favorite toy horse in the wind, another appeared on the porch 2 days later, carved carefully from a piece of wood. She wanted to thank him properly, but she didn't know how. She was used to people leaving, not staying. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned golden, Maria saw a figure walking slowly down the dirt road. It was Luke leading his horse instead of riding it. His shirt was dusty and his hat was pulled low. He looked tired, but when he saw her standing by the porch, he smiled. A small, real smile. "Evening, ma'am," he said softly. "Evening," she replied, brushing her hands on her apron. "Your horse okay?" "Just tired," he said. "We've been helping out at the Miller Ranch all week." "Long days," she nodded. "Would you like some water?" He hesitated, then nodded. This time, when she brought out the jar, she didn't stop at the door. She walked down the steps and handed it to him directly. "Thank you," he said, taking it carefully. "How's the boy?" "Tommy's fine. He keeps asking when he'll see you again." "I think you've made yourself a little hero," Luke chuckled softly. "He's a good kid. Reminds me that not everything in life is lost." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sky fade from orange to pink. Then Maria said, "Luke, why do you help us so much? You don't owe me anything." He looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. "You were kind to me when you didn't have to be," he said simply. "You gave me water. Most folks just turn away." Maria lowered her gaze. "I told you not to come inside," he smiled faintly. "And I didn't, but I don't need to be inside to care." Her chest tightened at his words. They were gentle, not forceful, yet they carried a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Before she could reply, he tipped his hat and said, "Take care of yourself, Maria." Then he led his horse away down the road. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what he'd said, about kindness and caring and what it meant to let someone close. The next morning, Tommy woke up with a fever. It wasn't serious at first, just a little warm. But by evening, his breathing grew heavy and his forehead burned. Maria panicked quietly. She didn't have a car. It had stopped working weeks ago, and the nearest doctor was in town almost 30 miles away. She tried calling, but the phone line was dead from the storm. She sat by Tommy's side, wiping his forehead, whispering softly, "You'll be okay, baby. You'll be okay." When she stepped outside to catch her breath, she saw something in the distance, a horse moving fast through the twilight. Her heart jumped. It was Luke. He rode up, his hat pulled low, his horse breathing hard. "I saw the smoke from your chimney," he said quickly. "You okay?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "It's Tommy, he's sick. I don't know what to do." Luke didn't hesitate. "There's a doctor in town, Dr. Hayes, I'll get him." "It's too far," she said. "You'll never make it back tonight." "I'll make it," he replied firmly. Before she could argue, he turned his horse and rode off into the growing darkness. Maria stood on the porch, trembling, watching until he disappeared. The night was long and heavy. She sat by Tommy's side, praying quietly, whispering stories to keep herself from falling apart. Hours passed. Then near dawn, she heard the sound of hooves again. When she ran outside, Luke was there, pale, tired, soaked with sweat. Behind him, another horse carried the town doctor. Dr. Hayes hurried inside, checked Tommy, gave him medicine, and said he'd be fine by morning. "He just needs rest and care," the doctor said. "You caught it early." Maria could barely speak. She turned to Luke, who stood by the door, exhausted. "You really went all that way," she whispered. He shrugged lightly. "Couldn't let you face it alone." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're shaking," she said. "You need to sit down." He shook his head. "I'll be fine. Please," she said softly. "Come inside." It was the same doorway where she had once told him not to enter. This time she stepped aside. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and walked in quietly. He sat at the table while she poured him warm tea. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fire and Tommy's breathing from the next room. "You didn't have to do this," Maria said finally. "No one's ever done something like that for me." Luke looked down at his hands. "Sometimes," he said, "people need someone to believe they're worth the effort." Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, to say more, but words felt too small for the feeling that filled her chest. When Tommy's fever broke the next day, Maria sat by his bed, holding his little hand. She looked at Luke, who was still sitting near the door, dozing lightly. The sunlight touched his face, and for the first time she saw peace there. After the doctor left, Luke helped fix the roof where the wind had torn it loose. He stayed for lunch, and Tommy insisted he join them. Maria cooked what little she had, beans, bread, and coffee, but Luke treated it like a feast. It became a quiet pattern after that. Luke didn't move in. He didn't even stay every day, but he came by often, to check the fence, to bring groceries from town, or to teach Tommy how to ride an old pony he'd found. Maria laughed more than she had in years. Still, deep down, she was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to let him stay. Afraid that someday he'd leave like everyone else. She had built her life around being careful, and love was not careful. Love was a risk. One afternoon, she found Luke sitting by the porch, carving another wooden toy. "You're quiet today," she said, sitting beside him. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking. The Miller Ranch is offering me steady work. It's a good job. I might take it." "Oh," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's good. I'll still be around," he added quickly. "Not far, just maybe it's time I stopped drifting." She nodded, but her heart ached. "You'll do fine," she said. "You deserve some peace." Luke looked at her gently. "So do you, Maria." They sat together as the sun went down, neither speaking. The silence wasn't heavy this time, it was warm, filled with things they didn't need to say aloud. Weeks later, Maria received a letter in the mail, from Luke. It was written in uneven handwriting. Simple and honest, it said, "Maria, I've taken the job. I'm building something steady here. The world has been quiet for a long time, but meeting you and Tommy reminded me that good people still exist. Thank you for the water that day. You didn't just give me a drink. You gave me back something I'd lost, trust. I'll come by when I can. Tell Tommy to keep practicing those knots. Luke." Maria read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer by her bed. She smiled softly, though her eyes were wet. From that day on, the road outside her home didn't feel lonely anymore. Sometimes when she saw dust rising in the distance, she wondered if it was Luke returning, and sometimes it was. He visited often, bringing small things, apples, rope, a hat for Tommy. And though they never spoke of love, it was there, quiet and sure, in the way he looked at her, in the way she waited for him. Months passed and life went on. Maria's diner job became easier. Tommy started school. Luke's work at the ranch grew steady. People in town began to see him differently, not as the mean cowboy, but as the man who had changed because someone had given him a reason to. One summer evening, Maria stood on her porch watching the sunset. The air smelled of rain and dust. She thought about how far she had come, from the scared woman who once said, "Please don't come inside," to someone who had learned that opening a door didn't mean losing control. She heard the soft sound of hooves and turned. Luke was there, smiling that quiet smile. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "Evening," she replied. "You're just in time for dinner." He dismounted and handed her a small bunch of wildflowers. "Brought these for you." She took them, smiling warmly. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply. They went inside together, the smell of bread and coffee filling the small home. Tommy laughed from the table, showing Luke his school drawings. Maria watched them both, her son's bright face, Luke's calm smile, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Home. Not the kind made of walls and roofs, but the kind made of trust, kindness, and the quiet courage to open one's heart again. And though life would still bring its share of struggles, the bills, the work, the long days, Maria knew she wasn't facing them alone anymore. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it begins with a simple act, a glass of water offered on a hot afternoon and the words, "Please don't come inside." Because sometimes, the person we keep outside the longest is the one who ends up finding their way in through the heart. Maria Jensen was not a woman who complained. Life had already taught her that nobody listened to complaints for long. She had learned that the only way to move forward was to keep her head down, work hard, and smile when people asked how she was doing. Every morning started the same. She woke up before the sun, when the air was still cool and the sky was a soft gray. Her small trailer creaked as she moved quietly so her 6-year-old son Tommy could sleep a little longer. She would boil water for instant coffee, glance at the cracked kitchen clock, and tell herself that she still had time before her first shift at the diner. Her life was simple, but it wasn't easy. Between her morning shift at the diner and her evening job cleaning rooms at the little roadside motel, she rarely had a moment to rest. Still, she tried to keep their home neat. The trailer was old, the paint on the door peeling, but she swept the porch every evening. It was her way of telling herself that she still had control, that even though the world outside was dusty and unpredictable, inside her little home there was peace. Tommy was the reason she kept going. He had big brown eyes and a smile that made even the hardest day seem a little softer. He loved drawing trucks on old paper bags and asking her endless questions about everything. Sometimes, late at night after she had tucked him in, Maria would sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the stars. She wondered what kind of life she was giving him. She hoped it was enough. It was early spring when he came. The cowboy people in town called mean, though no one could say why exactly. They said his name was Luke Carter. He worked on different ranches whenever there was a need for an extra hand, but mostly he kept to himself. He didn't drink with the men after work, didn't go to church on Sundays, didn't talk unless someone talked to him first. Maria first saw him one afternoon when the air shimmered with heat. She had just finished hanging laundry when she heard the sound of hooves. Looking up, she saw a man on horseback approaching her trailer from the long dirt road that stretched across the plain. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn jeans and a faded shirt, his hat tilted low over his face. Dust coated his boots and his horse's mane. For a moment she felt nervous. No one ever came out this far unless they needed something. She wiped her hands on her apron and stood by the porch steps, her heart beating faster than usual. When the man stopped a few feet away, he removed his hat and nodded politely. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and rough, like someone who wasn't used to speaking much. "I heard you used to rent a room out here." Maria hesitated. It was true. Years ago, when her husband had left and money was tight, she had rented out the small back room to travelers. But she had stopped after a few uncomfortable encounters. She didn't like strangers near her boy, and she didn't like depending on people she didn't know. "I don't anymore," she said quickly. "Not for some time." He nodded again, not offended. "Didn't mean to trouble you. I just need a place to stay for a few nights. I'll move on after that." Maria studied him carefully. There was something about him, not threatening, just worn. His clothes were old but clean. His eyes, a pale blue, carried something like tiredness, maybe regret. She could tell he wasn't a man looking for trouble, but she still felt uneasy. The desert had taught her that loneliness could make people unpredictable. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I can't help you." He looked past her toward the house, then back at her. "Could I at least get a glass of water?" "Been a long ride." She hesitated again. Her hand gripped the porch rail. The sun was beating down and she could see the sweat on his forehead. It didn't feel right to turn anyone away thirsty, but she also didn't want him near the door. So she stepped inside, poured water into a clean jar, and brought it out to him. She didn't open the door wide. She pushed the screen door just enough to pass the jar through the gap. "Here," she said softly. "Please don't come inside." Luke accepted the jar without a word. He drank slowly, standing still, eyes fixed on the horizon. When he handed it back, he gave a small nod. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it." Then he turned his horse and rode away. Maria stood there for a long time after he left. The silence of the land felt heavier somehow. She didn't know why her heart was beating so fast. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was something else. The sudden reminder that there were still people out there with stories she didn't know. That night, after putting Tommy to bed, she sat by the window again. The moonlight cast a silver glow on the dusty road. She thought about the man on the horse, the way he had spoken, the look in his eyes, lonely but polite. She shook her head and told herself it didn't matter. She had enough to worry about without thinking about strangers. But the next morning, when she stepped outside, she found her broken gate fixed. The old hinge that had been hanging loose was now repaired with a piece of wire, twisted tight and neat. She didn't have to guess who had done it. Days passed. Sometimes she saw him riding in the distance, never too close. Once he stopped by again to ask if she knew where he could find work. She told him about the ranch on the north side, where they sometimes needed extra help. He thanked her and left. At the diner, she heard people talk about him. Some said he had a bad temper. Others said he kept to himself because he had lost his family long ago. No one really knew the truth. But Maria knew how easily stories grew in small towns. People needed someone to talk about, and quiet men made easy targets. One afternoon, Tommy was playing with his small toy truck on the porch when Luke rode by again. He stopped when he saw the boy struggling to tie a piece of string around the truck's wheel. "You trying to fix that, buddy?" Luke asked, dismounting his horse. Tommy looked up shyly and nodded. "It keeps falling off." Luke crouched beside him, his movements slow and careful. "You need a better knot," he said. "Here, let me show you." He pulled a short piece of rope from his saddlebag and showed Tommy how to twist and loop it until it held firm. Maria watched from the doorway, unsure whether to speak. But there was something gentle about the way Luke spoke to her son, patient, not hurried. Tommy laughed for the first time in days. When Luke stood again, he tipped his hat to her. "Didn't mean to intrude," he said. "It's fine," she replied quietly. "Thank you for helping him." He nodded and walked back to his horse. As he rode away, Tommy waved. Maria didn't stop him. That evening, she found herself thinking about Luke again, about how a man who looked so stern could be so kind with a child. It confused her. Life had taught her to be careful, too careful maybe. But every time she saw Luke, something inside her softened, even when she didn't want it to. A week later, a storm rolled in from the west. The wind howled across the plain, shaking the old trailer. Maria hurried to cover the windows and bring the laundry inside. Tommy stood by the door, watching the sky turn gray. Then there was a knock. She opened the door just enough to see Luke standing there, soaked from rain, holding a bundle of firewood. "Thought you could use this," he said. "Wind's strong tonight," she hesitated. Her first instinct was to say no, to protect the small, safe world she had built for her son. But when she saw the wood, she realized how cold the night would get. "Thank you," she said softly. "Just leave it by the porch." He did as she asked, placing the wood carefully under the awning. As he turned to leave, she stopped him. "You'll get sick out there," she said. "I'll be fine," he answered with a faint smile. "Been through worse weather than this." For a moment, they looked at each other through the rain. There was no romance, no grand moment, just two tired souls trying to survive the same storm in different ways. After he left, Maria sat by the fire with Tommy. The warmth filled the small room, and for the first time in a long while, she felt safe, not just because of the fire, but because someone had cared enough to bring it. Over the next few days, Luke's presence became a quiet rhythm in their lives. He never came uninvited, never crossed her line. He helped when something broke, brought water from the well when her pump jammed, and once even left a small bag of apples by her porch. He never asked for anything in return. Maria didn't understand him, and maybe that was what intrigued her most. The town called him mean, but the man she saw was patient, gentle and lonely. Sometimes at night, she thought about how she had told him, "Please don't come inside." The words had come from fear, but now they echoed in her heart like a closed door she wasn't sure she wanted to keep shut. Luke, too, seemed to understand that boundary. He never pushed. He spoke little, worked hard, and treated Tommy with quiet respect. In return, the boy began to admire him, started talking about horses and ropes and Mr. Luke. Who knows how to fix anything? Maria pretended not to notice how her son's laughter had changed. Brighter now, more hopeful. One Sunday morning when she stepped outside, she saw a small wooden toy horse carved neatly and left on the porch rail. Tommy's name was scratched into the base. Maria picked it up, smiling without meaning to. She didn't need to ask who had made it. That evening, as the sky turned orange and the world fell quiet, she stood on the porch, holding the toy in her hands. The road stretched out before her, empty as always. Yet she felt less alone than she had in years. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Luke was riding again, maybe toward another ranch, maybe nowhere in particular. And though she had told him not to come inside, a part of her knew he already had.